Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Levy lecture. My name is Wendy Cromash, and I am pleased to welcome you to what is going to be a fascinating presentation and discussion with Silvia Foti. Silvia is the author of the memoir and the historical research project, The Nazi's Granddaughter. Let me tell you about Silvia. Silvia is an award-winning journalist, an investigative journalist, an English teacher. She holds master's degrees in journalism, education, and creative nonfiction. She's been published in the Chicago Tribune, Crain's Chicago Business, LA Parent, Dappled Things, Southtown Economics, Southwest News Herald, Buenos Aires Herald, Argentine News, and Salon.com. She's fluent in Lithuanian, English, and Spanish. She lives near Chicago. This is her third book. It is a gripping tale, difficult to read at some points because of the horrors it exposes, but you will be, I believe, as impressed as I am with Silvia's bravery and tenacity. So without any further ado, I welcome Silvia to the Levy Lecture Series. Please, one other point before I turn it over to Silvia. She is going to be asking some questions during her presentation where you will be asked to send a brief answer through chat. I will be communicating with her at that point. But all questions that you might have for her, please indicate those in the Q&A, and I will read them at the end after the presentation. Okay, Silvia, welcome. Thanks again for joining us, and I will see you on the other side in an hour.
All right, Wendy, thank you so much. I'm so pleased to be here. So as Wendy mentioned, I'm the brand new author of The Nazi's Granddaughter. It came out about 3 months ago, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit about it. So it all started in the year 2000. Before that, I was raised in Chicago in Market Park, and raised very Lithuanian in a Lithuanian community, grew up speaking only Lithuanian, went to kindergarten not even speaking English. And this was sort of a thing with Lithuanians, at least back then. They were so worried about maintaining their heritage while their homeland is occupied by the Soviet Union. They really wanted their children to preserve the language, because to them preserving the language is preserving the heritage. So as I was growing up, my mom and my grandmother talked a lot about Jonas Noreka, my mom's father, my grandmother's husband. And all I knew then was that he was a hero because he fought so bravely against the Soviet Union. What I discovered, though, and this is over the last 21 years, that, and as I was writing my book, I realized that on some level, my book is a study in glamorizing a perpetrator by hiding his deeds through a grand lie, and that is making him a hero. What I have still not figured out if this is subconscious or the conscious actions of Lithuania. Because I'm Lithuanian, I tend to forgive the homeland and look at it as if it was an innocent mistake for a while, but I know a lot of people do not see it that way. So I'm just offering you my perspective. Here's my first question. I only have 2 of these, but I grew up looking at this portrait of my grandfather. It hung in our dining room. And it was black and white. This is a colorized version, very recently colorized. But how do you think his looks helped in the deception? And go ahead and just write your answer in the chat, and Wendy will read a few of them out to me. So you're looking at this man. How do you think his looks help in the deception of the country glamorizing him as a hero and not facing the idea that he was a Holocaust perpetrator?
Okay, here are some of the answers. You can hear me? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. He's good looking, he's handsome, he's clean cut, he looks very Aryan. His blue eyes, he looks earnest, innocent, approachable, good looking, personal, trustworthy looking. He's looking straight at you. He must be honest. Beautiful blue eyes. Good looking people get away with more. That's basically
Okay.
more of the same, more of the same.
Okay. Yeah, I think too, you know, after studying this for the past 20 some years, his looks had a lot to do with the deception. Monsters don't look like this. And my grandmother had told me that she married him because he looked like a Hollywood movie star. And that's one of the first lines of my book, I think. So, whoops, I know. Okay, so here's a brief bio of him. Born 1910, died in a KGB prison in 1947. So he was 36 years old. Young, he died young. And the reason he got captured by the KGB is he was trying to lead a rebellion against the Soviets in 1945, 1946. He was trying to unify all the partisans to fight against the Russians. He called himself General Storm. It was a nom de guerre. He was really a captain. Anyway, nothing came of this rebellion. And this is where he was caught and then brought to KGB prison and tortured for 2 years. And so he essentially died a martyr fighting for Lithuania's freedom. Before that, he was in a Nazi concentration camp for almost 2 years. And so before that, he was the head of the Cholet district, which was during the Nazi occupation from 1941 to 1943. And before that, he led an uprising against the Soviets in 1941. And that one they won. They say they won, even though Germany basically took over the country right after that. So he really encapsulates the spirit of Lithuania in so many ways during this World War II era, because he was in a Nazi concentration camp and a KGB prison. And he played a big part in fighting against the Soviets during this time. And he was head of the Cholet district, kind of like a governor of that region, which is the second largest region of Lithuania. And that's all I knew about him before the year 2000. So in 1997, my brother and I went with my mother to Lithuania. Lithuania got its freedom in 1990. And my mom had been working on this book on her father for years and years and years. And as soon as Lithuania got its independence, she started flying there almost every year. And I went with her a few times as well. And in 1997, it was a really big deal because the president of the time, Algirdas Brazauskas, gave her the cross of the Vytis for her father. So my grandfather, Jonas Noreika, got the highest honor Lithuania could give to someone posthumously, this cross of the Vytis. So that, you know, that really sort of gave him, you know, it was the imprimatur of hero status. You can't get any higher than that with this award. So this is where I'm going to read you an excerpt from my book. My mom got the transcripts from the time that he was in the KGB prison, 3,000 pages. They were in Russian, and then she got them translated into Lithuanian, and I ended up translating a lot of it into English. And it's because of those KGB transcripts and these interrogations why he was declared a hero, because it really got into how he was trying to lead this rebellion. So I'm going to open up. I contemplated 3,000 pages of KGB transcripts sitting in front of me. My hope was that they would yield details of my grandfather's rebellion against the communists during the second Soviet occupation, and that this task would serve as a welcome delay in my investigation of the rumor. Somehow, my mother had managed to obtain these Russian documents shortly after Lithuania's independence in 1990. It seems that she had bribed someone to make copies, asked a friend to smuggle them from Vilnius to Chicago, and then mailed the transcript copies to Damianas Rauka, her father's colleague, during the 5-day uprising against the first Soviet occupation, to be translated into Lithuanian. She had paid him thousands of dollars for this service. Damianas was also my mother's volunteer clipping service agent. He had taken it upon himself to cut out articles about her father and to send them to her accompanied by lengthy letters. I remember her occasionally, over the course of nearly a decade, mentioning the arrival of these packets to me. Last week it was 3, this week another 2, she had remarked. He just never stops. It's been like this for years. I can't even bear to open his envelopes anymore. I now understood how overwhelmed she must have felt. Damianas continued zealously in his role as a provider of both old and recent clippings, even after my mother's death. My grandfather remained a subject of interest in the fatherland, and the articles concerning Jonas Noreika were accompanied by letters of detailed instructions as to how I should write my book. I winced at the arrival of each new package. My mother had organized the 3-hole punched KGB transcript pages into 5 thick white binders. I had hoped that their contents would follow chronological order, beginning with my grandfather's first interrogation after his capture by the KGB in March 1946, and ending with the last, shortly before his execution on February 26, 1947. But the transcripts weren't so easily organized. Jonas Noreika was one of 11 rebels who stood trial together. Their testimony, too, was included. Attempting to follow the threads of the various accounts was like trying to analyze a spider web. Nearly every page of the typed Lithuanian translation bore Damianas's handwritten commentary in the margins or between the lines. I found myself having to read each page 2 or 3 times. First the translation itself, then Damianas's commentary, then both together in order to understand his view of the interrogations. Only then could I begin to render the transcripts into English. The massive amount of information in the 7 files regarding the 11 accused individuals forced the realization that I couldn't possibly decode all of it. I would have to select the passages I wanted to translate for the book. So that's the KGB transcripts. So here's how the story started. My mom in the year 2000 was only 60 years old, and she ended up in the hospital and had gotten very sick, had gotten an infection, and it became really, really serious. And so she called me to her bedside, and she took my hand and she said, "Silvia, you have to write the book." And so, of course, this was very distressing for me because I immediately knew that she thought she was going to die, because she would have never given me this project that she had been working on her entire life. And I knew that this project was so important to her that she couldn't just let it go. So that's how I got handed this project. I really would have never, this was my mother's project. I had no intention of investigating this. And so much of this was just one, I call it an accident after another. Of course, at that point in January 2000, I didn't know, all I knew was that he was a hero. I had no idea about his role in the Holocaust yet. And my first hint arrives in July 2000, about 5 months later, but I didn't recognize it yet because I was still that naive. This is my grandfather kind of horsing around with my grandmother. They were dating then. And in July 2000, my grandmother, who I called Mochuta, was on her deathbed. And so now she calls me over and she says, Sylvia, what's going on with the book? How's the book? And I said, oh, it's fine. It's going okay. I'm not, I've brought over all the material for my mother and I started looking through it. I'll get to it. I was a journalist at the time. I'll get through it. I'm not going to let it go the way Mom did. And I thought I was giving her great words of comfort. And she says, don't write the book. Just let history lie. And I said, of course I have to write the book. I promised Mom. There's no way I'm not going to fulfill this promise. And she just rolled over in bed and faced the wall. And at the time, I just thought she was trying to give me a pass from this, kind of insane deathbed promise I gave my mother. That's all I thought. I thought she was just trying to give me a pass. So both of them wanted to be buried in Lithuania. And they were cremated here in Chicago. And then we brought their cremains to Lithuania. And my brother and I took them over in October 2000. October 8th is my grandfather's birthday. So that would have been his 90-year memorial birthday. And a lot of people showed up for the funeral there. This is the first president of Lithuania paying his respects to me and my brother, basically because of our grandfather. So when he came in, there were reporters and photographers, and it was like the sea parted, and he walked in. So we were just so honored that he had showed up. Shortly after that, we were taken to a building that was just really a few blocks away from the cathedral where the funeral was. And then they had just put up this plaque of my grandfather. And it's hanging in the Wróblewski Library, Academy of Sciences, they call it. It's a rather large building in Vilnius with 3 cross streets. And the reason the plaque hangs there is because my grandfather worked in this building as a lawyer, trying to build up this underground rebellion against the Soviets. So the plaque says, in this building, 1945-1946, worked a noteworthy resistor, Lithuania's National Council and Lithuania's Armed Forces organizer and leader, Jonas Noreika, General Storm, shot February 26, 1947. So those were my last moments of innocence, because right after that, I first heard the horrible rumor about him. And it happened at the Jonas Noreika Grammar School. And we were greeted very grandly. The children had lined up with flowers and singing nice Lithuanian songs. And the director calls me over into his office, and the teachers are standing all around. And he says, I heard you're writing the book about your grandfather, that you took the project over from your mother. And I said, yes. And he said, you're such a good daughter. Our country really needs its heroes. And I said, thank you. And I said, as long as I'm here, why don't you tell me how you named the school after my grandfather? And he said, well, before we had this horrible Russian name. because the Soviets had occupied Lithuania until 1990, and everything Lithuanian was renamed Russian. And he said, as soon as we got our independence, we wanted to give it a good patriotic Lithuanian name. And your grandfather was born here in this little town of Shikone. And he's such a magnificent hero that it just seemed like a natural that we would name the school after him. And I thought that would be the end of the story. And then he pulls me to the side and he says, but you know, I got a lot of grief over naming the school after your grandfather. And I said, grief from who? And he says, the Jews. And I said, what could the Jews possibly say about my grandfather? And he looked at me like I was the idiot because I didn't know this. And he said, he was accused of killing Jews. So that was the very, very first time I'd heard that. It felt like a punch to the gut. I needed to sit down. You know, it really, really upset me to hear that. And I certainly wasn't prepared for it. And so I've got an excerpt of that moment in the book. My brother and I were delighted to arrive at the Jonas Noreka Grammar School. It was a modest white brick building with oak trim. Hundreds of children must have run through its halls and sat in its classrooms, learning about my grandfather's World War II exploits, as we had done at our grandmother's feet. Viktoras Ashmanskas, imposing in his decorated Lithuanian Air Force uniform, had arranged for our welcome as honorary guests. We had been asked to distribute prizes to the winners of the student races held to mark our grandfather's 90th birthday. The school director, Boleslavas Tallat-Kelpsha, a stout man with disheveled white hair, grasped our hands energetically, saying how pleased he was that we had come to host the ceremony. At his direction, the students, holding flowers, lined the halls to greet us as we entered the building. Tallat-Kelpsha offered us frothy mugs of beer. We could hardly refuse, though it was not yet noon. Ray and I were led to his office, where he proudly showed us a thick scrapbook filled with articles about our illustrious ancestor. Many of the clippings included the familiar photograph of Jonas Noreka arrayed in his military uniform. We had seen this picture every day of our childhoods. I set down my beer to flip through the album's pages. The headlines were repetitive. Generolas Vetra. I want to die on February 16th. In memory of Generolas Vetra. A monument will stand in Shikone. The directors, secretaries, teachers, and children all looked on as Ray and I perused the book. Our mother had similar scrapbooks of our grandfather, I told the director in our native tongue. He patted me on the back. I can imagine. I heard you were writing a book on Jonas Noreka, that you have taken over the task from your mother. How wonderful. How did you decide to name the school after him, I asked. He stroked his chin and answered, it was during a meeting of the county board. We wanted to pick a new name to replace the Russian one. Your grandfather's name surfaced immediately. Then abruptly, he pulled me and my brother aside. Lowering his face, he confided, I got a lot of grief at first when we picked his name. The comment perplexed me, but all eyes were still upon me, as if I were a great celebrity. I struggled to conceal my confusion. He was accused of being a Jew killer, whispered the director. My eyes met Ray's. He too was aghast. Accused of being a Jew killer? What could the director mean? Had we heard correctly? I studied his face for a moment, feeling off balance, then looked around the room at the teachers and others assembled. Who were all these people? And who was I? Or my mother? Or my grandmother? Or my grandfather? My mind whirled in disbelief. There must be some mistake. It can't be true. The school director was still talking to me, but I couldn't hear him. I felt as if he were speaking from the other side of a long and winding tunnel. He clearly expected a response from me, but I was at a loss for words, or even for thought. I didn't want to have a conversation about the possibility that my grandfather was a Jew killer. It felt as if my brain were doing somersaults. As my legs seemed about to buckle, I grabbed a chair and plopped down heavily, breathing deeply, to stop my heart from sprinting, every nerve in my body at military attention. So that was the big moment, the big reveal. But I didn't believe it right away. I came back to Chicago and I essentially went into denial for about 10 years. I talked to my father, his brothers, other people of that generation. And I said, have you heard this rumor of Jonas Noreka being accused of being a Jew killer? And they said, oh yeah, we heard it. I'm like, what? How come I didn't hear about it? And they said, well, it's just communist propaganda. It's not true. The communists are always inventing stories to make Lithuanians look bad. They just don't want us to have a hero. It's not true. So that's what I believed. That's what everybody around me was saying. And it was a very convenient story too. But my background was journalism. I went to Northwestern in your neck of the woods there at Evanston. And I'm at Midway Airport now. And anyway, because of my journalism background, I thought, all right, I can't completely ignore this rumor. I'm going to have to address it somehow. And my strategy was to address it and to prove that Jonas Noreka is innocent. I was hoping to exonerate him. As twisted as all that is, it at least got me to look into that period. At the time, I was a journalist. I was writing for all kinds of other people, and I had no time to write for myself with what I thought was a very important story. So I switched careers and I became a high school English teacher. So that gave me the summers off to work on this story. So during those 10 years, I was, besides, I was a mother, I was working full-time in something else. This was completely a side project. But I was finally ready, getting myself ready to investigate this rumor. And I think it took me so long, mostly because of all the psychological reasons. The denial was very strong. And I think that's what Lithuania is going through right now. I had some technical hurdles. I had to improve my writing skills. So I got an MFA in creative nonfiction to write the story. Once all that was done, though, once I really started looking, the information was not that hard to find. So one of the first things I found was a brochure that my grandfather wrote called Pakel Galva Lietuvių, which translates into Raise Your Head Lithuanian. And it's 32 pages. He wrote it in 1933, and he was only 22 years old. He had just joined the Lithuanian army. And essentially, the whole brochure is an attack on the Jews. Basically, it says things like they have all the best positions, they have all the best businesses, they're earning, most of our money. It's time we boycott the Jews. Lithuania is for Lithuanians. From now on, you should just buy from other Lithuanians and not the Jews. So it was like this for 32 pages. And it has been called the Lithuanian Mein Kampf. And I'm sure my grandfather had read Mein Kampf by then. He knew German. They could speak German. And Mein Kampf was written in 1926, so 7 years earlier. And I think it inspired him to write this. But I had a little out. This document alone did not fully convince me because he didn't really call for the killing of the Jews. I mean, it was horrible what he wrote, terribly anti-Semitic, but he wasn't calling for their death. He was calling for an economic boycott. So I thought this doesn't prove that he killed Jews, but it certainly proved what was in his heart, and it certainly revealed his hatred. So the document that really finally convinced him was when he was the chairman or the governor of Cholet during the Nazi occupation. He signed several documents. He signed like 1,000 documents, but 70 of them had to do with the Holocaust. And of those 70, this one's the worst one. So on August 22nd, 1941, he called for all Jews and half-Jews in the region of Cholet to be rounded up and brought to a ghetto that he wanted created, a new ghetto to be created in Jagare, which was north of Cholet, right on the border of Latvia. And they all had to be brought there within 1 week. So there were more than 2,000 Jews, families, children, grandparents, all rounded up and brought over to that ghetto. And within 6 weeks, but like the first week of October, they chose the date of Yom Kippur. They slaughtered more than 2,000 Jews. So this was the document that finally convinced me that this is much more than a rumor. And this is the one that flipped the switch for me and really made me to decide that I'm going to completely change the focus of my book. And now I'm going to just make it my mission to look at the Nazi occupation. And when I started doing that, I noticed that in the Lithuanian history literature, there's so much on the first Soviet occupation, this 5-day uprising, and so much after the second Soviet occupation until 1990. But there's hardly nothing on the Nazi occupation. So I had to really go into the Jewish history. And that's where I found a lot of the information on the Holocaust in Lithuania. And this is shocking. I went to Lithuanian school here in Chicago, and nobody ever talked about the Holocaust in Lithuania. So I did not even know that there was a Holocaust in Lithuania until after I started looking at all this to write this story about my grandfather. I grew up, certainly read the Diary of Anne Frank and Elie Wiesel's Night, and we talked about the Holocaust at school, and Germany, Poland. Nobody really mentioned Lithuania, so I didn't know about it. So I started writing, and I got my MFA in creative nonfiction. They let me use this as my thesis. And so by the time it was all done, I got the MFA. They said, but this is not your book. You're a long way off from that. You're going to have to go to Lithuania and do your own research. So by that point, I was already a teacher, so I did have my summers off. So in the summer of 2013, I spent 7 weeks in Lithuania doing my own research, talking to a lot of people. And by the time I was done, I had found out that he had given orders to kill 2,000 Jews in Plunga by mid-July 1941. He had been involved in the murders of Jews in Telche, and had given orders to round up Jews and distribute their property in Cholet when he was the governor of that region. So conservatively, he contributed to 8,000 deaths under his watch, and other numbers have 15,000. So I found no evidence that he actually pulled the trigger and killed the Jews personally. And this is a big excuse that Lithuanians have for him, that if he didn't pull the trigger, he's innocent, that he just pushed a few papers. So in the rest of the world, that argument doesn't really hold up too well. So my conclusion is he was a death murderer. And so here's another question for you. Who is guiltier, the ones who shoot or the ones who organize everything? Or are they both guilty? If you could put your answers in chat, and maybe Wendy can just read a few of them.
Happy to oblige.
Thank you. So who's guiltier? This is a big,
Okay. Most people are saying both. All guilty. Organizers are more guilty. Definitely both. Overwhelmingly, it's both.
okay. All right. Yeah. So this is one of the excuses that Lithuanians have to maintain the heroism of my grandfather. And really the ones who did the shoot in Lithuania, the Jews were killed one by one by bullets. It's the murder by bullets, they call it. There were no gas chambers. So Lithuania has the horrible distinction of killing more than 95% of its Jews, the highest percentage in all of Europe. And the number is about 220,000. About 1,000 Nazis were in Lithuania. And that means Lithuanians themselves had to help those 1,000 Nazis kill the 220,000 Jews. And the organization of it is a really big role. The ones who did the shooting usually were the degenerates, the drunks. You basically had to pay them with a bottle of vodka to do that. But the sort of the officers and the guys who thought it all up were the organizers. And so in some ways, I know both are guilty, but in some ways the planning it's like hiring the hitman. Who's guiltier, the one who hires the hitman or the hitman? So it's not an easy answer. I don't know the answer either, but I do agree that he's at least just as guilty. So while I was there, I hired a Holocaust guide, Simas Dovidavičius, and this is the Holocaust Museum in Vilnius. And I had a really interesting story with him too. I have a friend in Chicago, and he's a reporter. He used to be a reporter for the Sun-Times, and he's Jewish. And they call Lithuanian Jews Litvaks. I don't know if you all know that. And he's a Litvak, and he came back from a Holocaust trip, a Holocaust tour in Lithuania, and he calls me up, and it's early 2013. Howard Walensky is his name. And he says, I just came back from this Holocaust tour in Lithuania. I'm like, oh, I never even heard of that. What is that? And he says, well, it's where you hire a Holocaust guide, and he takes you around the country where he thinks your relatives are buried. And I'm like, oh my God, that sounds terrible. And he's like, I know, but it's very meaningful, and that's all we have. And so we finished our conversation, and then a few days later, I call up Howard, and I said, Howard, I have a really crazy idea. What do you think if I hire your Holocaust guide and ask him to take me to all the places in Lithuania where he thinks my grandfather played a role in killing Jews? And Howard said, that's a really crazy idea, but it's good. And so then we contacted Simon, and Simon initially didn't want to do it. He didn't want to deal with the granddaughter of a perpetrator. But I guess a few weeks later, he contacts me again, and he says, I've been doing a lot of research about Jonas Noreika. He's a very interesting man. I'm kind of getting involved in learning about him, and I think I do want to help you with this. So I spent time with Simon. I was there for 7 weeks, I would say. Well, we had a full 1 week, 10 days together, but we were always on the phone together. And he gave me a lot of information as well. He convinced me to interview the director of the Genocide Resistance and Research Center. At that time, it was Teresa Borowskaite. And I was really reluctant to do it, thinking she wouldn't say yes. But Simon kept pushing me into it. And so I wanted to please Simon. And I said, okay, I'll do it. And anyway, she said yes. So we had the interview, and she was very cordial and polite. But I asked her, I said, what about this document, from August 22nd, 1941, that my grandfather signed to round up all the Jews and half-Jews and send them to Żagaria, where they were all killed? How can the Genocide Resistance Research Center make him a hero with just from signing that document? And her answer was, it's hard to know what he really felt in his heart when he signed that document. So we have to presume his innocence. So I don't know. I was a little stunned by that answer. And that was kind of when I was starting to understand how this denial is working in defending my grandfather. Oh, the other thing I want to show you is, this is the Museum of the Holocaust in Lithuania, where, they honor the death of 220,000 Jews murdered there. And this big building here is the Genocide Resistance and Research Center, which is concerned with finding out how Lithuanians suffered under the communists. So you can kind of see the priority of the country just with these two buildings. 2018, I finally finished my book, and I connected with Grant Goshen. He's a Litvak living in California now, originally from South Africa. Apparently, many Litvaks fled to South Africa just before the Holocaust because no other country would take them, and South Africa did. So there's a lot of Litvaks in South Africa, and that's where he grew up. And also, he kept hearing stories about Lithuania as well as he was growing up. And after Lithuania got its independence, he started traveling to Lithuania too. He lost over 100 relatives in the Holocaust. And he had found out it was because of my grandfather, Jonas Noreika, because they were in that Šiauliai region. And he became very upset that Jonas Noreika is considered a hero. And he and I were working independently. We didn't even know about each other. He said he knew about me, but I had no idea about him. And in 2018, we finally met. And the way it happened is when you're trying to get a book published, and after you get through all those rejections, somebody finally tells you you need an author platform. So it's not enough to write a book anymore. You have to have a platform, which means you have to somehow get in the press and in the media. And so one of the first things I did was build my website. And within days, I get an email from a researcher from Lithuania saying he's working for a man by the name of Grant Goshen. And that Grant Goshen is conducting a lawsuit now against the Genocide Resistance and Research Center for defending the good name of Jonas Noreika. And at this point, he's gone through all of Lithuania's 5 courts and had 20 legal actions, and he lost them all. The good news is it forced the Genocide Resistance and Research Center to go on the record of just how they would defend Jonas Noreika. And so after I met Grant and after all this happened, I had to rewrite my book for the gazillionth time because it just kept changing. It's not old. It's not just 80 years old. This is happening right now. So in between all my chapters, I have little excerpts from that lawsuit of how the Genocide Center is defending my grandfather. And so, you know, you could see the contrast between the official Lithuanian position and, you know, what I'm discovering about my grandfather. So anyway, Grant does not let things go. Losing 20 times was not enough for him in Lithuania. So now he's filed the case in the European Court of Human Rights. That's where the case is today. He filed it in February. It's like this big team of lawyers. And I guess he will find out in about a year whether they will even accept the case. This is like the Supreme Court here, like, you know, they decline to listen to a lot of cases and then they accept a few of them. So the European Court of Human Rights, they only accept about 5% of the cases presented. So we have a 5% chance of this case making it. But if it makes it, it's going to be a big deal. So once I connected with Grant, he and I teamed up and started working together. And he does a lot of these talks with me too. And we started getting a lot of press together because it's unusual to have, you know, the grandchild of a survivor and a perpetrator together on the same side, fighting the country of Lithuania for honoring a Holocaust perpetrator. So it's become a big story. So this plaque in 2019 became an issue. As more press was being generated on this, there was this guy who was running for the European Parliament, and he essentially smashed the plaque. And I have a very dramatic video that Wendy says she's going to share. So I guess I'll stop sharing, and Wendy, you'll show that. It's like a 30-second clip.
Okay, hang on.
When Adolf Hitler occupied Lithuania,
Can't see it.
Jonas Noreika was appointed
You can only hear it.
as a
Okay,
chief
hang on,
of
hang
North.
Hang on. Let me share the screen.
North Lithuanian region.
Yes.
The image of Noreika is everywhere.
Just the sound.
Pardon me?
Just the sound. We can't see it.
Let's see. We're sharing the screen. Advance. I don't know, Sylvia. I'm trying. We
All
did
right.
this before.
All right. Let me know when we'll just move on without it.
Yeah. You cannot move the video when your video is hidden. Gallery. Yeah, I think.
All right, I'll just move on.
Okay, sorry.
Nope. That's okay. So, well, the video shows him smashing the plaque 14 times with the sledgehammer, and then it all falls down. So, final question for you. Guess what happened next after this plaque was smashed? What did the country of Lithuania do? You could put your answer in chat, and Wendy will just read what's coming in. What happened? What, the plaque is down, and now the country of Lithuania has to respond. What does it do?
They put up a new one.
You know Lithuania. You know how it goes. They did. And they tried to arrest the Stanislavas Tomas for vandalism.
What a smart group we have. They got it right. He was arrested, reconstruct the plaque. The smasher was arrested, put up a new one.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, yes. So here's the new and improved plaque. It's even better than the old one. And they, put it up very ceremoniously and rousing folk music. And, before the plaque was up, people were having vigils, candlelit vigils, and putting flowers there. So that's how it was. And that is the end of my presentation, and I'm ready for questions.
And we have a lot of questions. So hang on one second. Let's see. Stop sharing. Gallery view. Oh wait, let's stop video. Okay. Let's see. I should be on screen. I don't know why I'm not. Okay. Let me read you some of the questions. What other books have you written?
The other two were mystery novels.
Okay.
Skullduggery and the Diva's Fool.
Okay. Let's see, we have. Why was Norieka sent to a Nazi camp from 1943 to 45?
Because this is something that Lithuania is very proud of, and it should be. It was the only country not to enlist in the SS. And so the Nazis were trying to enlist the military age guys to join, and Lithuanians boycotted the enlisting, and instead they sent like these old men, with canes walking in. And so like they even mocked the Nazis. And so the Nazis got very upset over that, and they rounded up 45 of the country's leaders to send as hostages to the Stutthof concentration camp. In the hopes that Lithuania would change its mind and join the SS. So Lithuania never did. And these guys stayed there for almost 2 years. Now, the interesting thing is for 6 weeks, they were treated like anybody else was treated in a Nazi concentration camp, very horribly, and about half of them died. But after that, Himmler made them honorary prisoners. And so they didn't have to work. They got new beds, new sheets, new clothes, new perks, and they didn't get to eat as much as they wanted to. But other than that, their life was much, much better. So it was nothing in comparison to what the Jews went through in a Nazi concentration. The first 6 weeks it was. The first 6 weeks was like, even as bad as how it was for the Jews. But after that, no, they were fine. It was a completely different thing.
What an odd label, honorary prisoners. Denise says, God bless you for not giving up and not giving in. These stories need to be told. So there's several questions about what your mother and grandmother think. And I guess within that, in the book, it's evident that your grandmother was aware of what was going on. But your mom was very young when all of this was taking place, and she may not have been aware as she was gathering the research. So do you have any thoughts about that? And then the tandem question is, what do your current family members think about this project?
Yeah, my mom was 2 in 1941, 2 years old. She was born in 1939. She left Lithuania in 1944. So I don't think my mom knew. I don't think my mom really knew. I think my grandmother really knew, though. I think most adults in Lithuania had to notice Jews disappearing. And most heard, the screaming, and many took property that was available. So if you were an adult in Lithuania at that time, chances are you had a good idea of what was going on. And my grandmother being married to my grandfather, I think she really knew what was going on. Maybe she didn't know every single detail, but she knew a lot. I think my mom got as far as hearing the rumor and then going into denial. I think she just never got past the denial. That's a huge psychological hurdle. And so I do understand why most Lithuanians are there, because it's extremely difficult to accept this about a close relative. And my father is still alive. He's remarried. And he read the book, and he's sort of now on the fence. Maybe I found some information that maybe some of it is, he's kind of on the fence. He can't go all the way over. He wishes that it wasn't me who wrote the book. He's like, why couldn't it, have been a PhD historian? And I'm like, Dad, I always ask myself that question all the time. Why wasn't it a PhD historian with a PhD? Why? And why is it me? And I asked, I landed with, I think as the granddaughter, my voice has been carrying farther, and because it's such a personal story. So that's where I landed with that. You're muted.
Thank you. That was the the dogs were barking. Okay. Can you talk about the psychological pressures and it was almost trauma that you experienced? I mean, reading the book and hearing your recounts of weeping and just breaking down at different points around the country was upsetting. Can you, talk about that experience and how you have tried to heal?
Yeah, it was a long and painful journey. It really was traumatic. It felt like a psychological blow. And that's why I understand the denial, because this is not easy to accept. And it's a very, very heavy burden. And so after the denial, I would say I went through periods of depression, and then it alternated with periods of anger. And I think, at least in the periods of anger, I had energy to move forward with this, because now I was just getting upset as hard as it was for me to accept what happened with my grandfather, the other part that was maybe equally as hard is to see the cover-up of what he did, the official cover-up by the Lithuanian government of what he did. And not just my grandfather. My grandfather's one of many. But I purposely decided as a strategy, I'm just going to focus on my grandfather, because I thought by focusing on one man and his life and the effect that that has on one granddaughter, that's going to hit more people than, what's that? One death is a story, 1,000 is a statistic. So I really wanted to make it as specific as possible. And today I find it cathartic because I know I'm telling the truth. And so to me, the hard part is over. The hard part for me was accepting the truth. And then, then it was like technical things to just get the story out and get it done. But to me, the hardest part was the psychological part of it.
I'm glad you're in a good place with it, because it was agonizing for you, and that was very apparent. Your brother was with you on part of this journey. How has your brother handled it?
He has been extremely supportive. He's read lots of drafts along the way, and so he's been very supportive about it. He's more removed because he's in California. But I had someone, he had the same experience I did growing up and hearing the stories about my grandfather. And then he was there when we heard that rumors, at the school. And then after that, we kind of separated. He went back to California and I came back to Chicago, but we stayed in touch the whole time through. So he's on board. He's definitely on board.
Can you talk about how the reception to your research and your book has been within the Lithuanian community here in Chicago?
Mostly cold and frigid and the big chill and lots of denial. There are exceptions. I have friends, and my friends have read the book. And so, the handful or so. And so they're supportive, but they don't want to go public with it. So I haven't had Lithuanians come out publicly in a big way. I'm getting a lot of back channel support, but it's like they're all too scared to go public with this yet. I have hope that things will turn around. I do have hope. I just don't know if it's going to be in my lifetime.
Before we went on today, you and I were talking about some of the international publication arrangements that you've been able to secure. Can you share those with the audience, please?
Yeah, it's already translated in Spanish. So HarperCollins Mexico it's already out in Spanish. But I'm very happy that a publisher in Lithuania has taken it, because I thought Lithuania would be the last country on earth to do it. So I'm really happy that they took it. And then also, it's going to come out in Hungarian and in Polish.
That's great.
Yeah, so that's good news.
Okay, there are a couple of comments from people who've looked it up on Goodreads. Apparently they're internet trolls who are saying that this is fiction, but the internet is filled with...
Not fiction.
No, of course not. Of course not. No, I mean, it's extremely well documented and filled with footnotes, and you have hundreds of sources. So no, it's absolutely true. Michelle would like to know, has the Jewish community reached out to you?
Yes, the Jewish community has been very excited about this project, very warm to me. And I've gotten invitations to speak to several Jewish groups, synagogues, temples. So that has been really good. So lots from the Jews, nothing from the Lithuanians.
Talk about the invitation you've received to travel to Israel.
Yeah, the Lithuanian Israel Association has invited me. So I'll be going to Israel. Dates are not set yet, but we're looking at early October for about a week. And I don't know where I'll speak yet. We're just deciding on dates. And the Olga Lengyel Institute, which is a Holocaust education group, has invited me to go to Lithuania to teach the teachers in Lithuania about the Holocaust. So that will be late October, so far as what we're looking at.
Is the Holocaust taught in Lithuania in the school system?
Not in a deep way, kind of in an abstract way, is my understanding. They haven't really faced their history yet. And I even asked that, is it taught in the universities? And so even at the university level, it's not really taught that much, which explains why it's not taught anywhere else.
I'm looking for, there was a comment by someone who talked about how during a trip to the Baltic, Richard says, when we visited the Baltic countries a few years ago, we were surprised to learn that they refer to World War II as the Russian-German War. So, language can be very useful to protect the listeners as well as the speakers from saying what the truth is. They don't use in the book the letters that you quote. They don't use the words killed. They say it was taken care of. They were exterminated. They were disposed of. All kinds of euphemisms. Okay, so
that's denial.
Right.
Part of the denial. And there are 10 stages of genocide that Dr. Stanton has put together, and the last stage is denial. Because once it's all committed, they don't want to get caught that they did it.
Right. Paula shares this. In Eichmann in Jerusalem, a study in the banality of evil, she writes, this is Barbara Tuchman, I think, is the author of that book. She writes that what horrified her is that Eichmann does not stand out of the crowd. There's nothing special about him. He can even appear normal. Given that reality, what is the lesson to be learned from the actions of your grandfather?
Well, that's why I started off with a little, just his looks are just really, for a very good looking man. And you don't usually ascribe villainous characteristics to people who are good looking. They're all, helpers. And there is even a story that he helped to save Jews. So as his defense.
Were you able to verify that story?
That he saved Jews? No, nobody really could verify it. It's and my response to that is, just like here in the United States, we have the whole slavery issue, and owners with slaves would have their very special slaves that they loved, So we're just human, filled with contradictions. So I could see my grandfather liking 1 or 2 or 3 Jews and then exterminating thousands. Like, that's possible too.
Right. Did you read, was there any documentation about what happened to the Lithuanian townspeople that assisted with this? Because you talked about how, that assisted with the murdering, because you talked about how it was face-to-face killing. They didn't have gas chambers. They were looking at people directly as they were doing the killing and hearing the sounds of the crying and, you know, as people were raiding in locked buildings. So there's one part in the book where you talk about how the men who were doing the killing were drunk beforehand and then more drunk after, but were there long-term effects, or did you meet anybody that was there?
Most people at this point who committed the murders are dead, because my grandfather was 30 in 1941, and that's rather young for me now that I'm turning 60. But there's no one, you know, at this point, only children, people who were children at the time, are alive today, and they're in their 90s.
Do you think any of these people talked about it with their relatives, with their descendants?
No. I mean, there might be exceptions, but in general, well, first of all, Lithuania was occupied by the Soviet Union. So that put the country in a deep freeze as far as any freedoms are concerned. So they had no freedom to analyze their own history. So everything was just covered up, and whatever they could study is whatever the Soviets said they could study. So there was none of that. Also, because they were taken over by the Soviets, if they collaborated with the Nazis, they'd be considered an enemy to the Soviets. So there's no way they would talk about it for that reason too. So like everybody, you know, like even earlier we were talking about Germany and what a wonderful example Germany is for facing its past. But Germany was free right after World War II. So, and I've been talking to a few Germans, they really only started facing their past in the 70s and 80s. So they went through like this 30-year period of silence as well. And Lithuania now is like in its 30th year of independence. So, and it's just starting to talk about it, I think a lot, mostly because of my book and another book that came out. So between our two books, people are finally raising the subject and starting to talk about it. So it's a very complicated political problem. And I guess Lithuania is still dealing with its own level of maturity as a democracy.
It's pretty amazing what you've done through your book. Just bringing this part of history to light. Lynn shares this experience. In 1996, my daughter was assigned a genealogy project about tracing her family. She decided to see what she could find out about my father's family, who had come from Lithuania before World War II. At the time, social media was just getting started. She started getting emails from teenagers in Lithuania informing her that either that there never had been Jews in Lithuania, or that they had all left voluntarily and no one was killed by the Nazis or by fellow Lithuanians.
Wow.
Yeah, we are able to convince ourselves of things that we want to believe. Okay, let's see some other questions. Was Lithuania more anti-Semitic than the rest of Europe?
That I don't know. That I don't know. You know, I'm not a historian, and I haven't like done all of Europe. All I know is that all of Europe was anti-Semitic. I have heard that. I don't know. Lithuania did have a strong streak of anti-Semitism. I mean, it did. I don't know if it was stronger than anywhere else. It did have the highest percentage of Jews killed. So if that's the barometer, I mean, you were safer in Germany than in Lithuania if you were Jewish.
Wow. Susan Wenninger corrected me. Hannah Arendt wrote Eichmann in Jerusalem. Thank you, Susan. Have you been in touch with the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center?
I haven't. I should be.
I can introduce you to their director of education if you'd like.
Great. I'd love
Okay.
that.
Let's see. Cynthia says, considering the controversy in the United States about critical race theory, it's not difficult to understand that Lithuanians don't want to face their past. We talked about this before as well.
Yeah, it's so much easier to see it in another country than in our own. And I think that's the case for Lithuanians too.
That's pretty much. Is the Lithuanian government supportive of you going into the schools?
My guess is no today, because 2 years ago, I was invited by this Olga Lengel Institute to go to Lithuania before COVID. And this was the first time they were going. And after they invited me, the president called me up and he had to disinvite me because the government of Lithuania contacted the ambassador of the US in Lithuania at that point and said, maybe Silvia Foti shouldn't come.
Well, but hopefully now that it's a new administration and a new ambassador, you will have better luck.
I hope so. I have high hopes. I do have high hopes. I think it's going to happen.
Sylvie, another thing for your trip in the fall, I had mentioned to you that I want to follow you on social media just to keep up, but maybe you can invite a journalist to go with you, to keep reporting on it, because it's an important story and you're really incredibly brave to have pursued this.
Thank you.
Do you have any thoughts about when you think about your mom? I mean, you made a deathbed promise to her. You fulfilled your obligation. Do you have any thoughts about what she might have thought about the research you uncovered?
I do. I mean, I think about it all the time. She and I became very close, at the end. And she was a very intelligent woman. She was an opera singer. She had a PhD in literature. She raised me. And I think, I'm assuming she's in heaven. And so she's in a more enlightened place. And I think she would accept the truth today in her enlightened state of being. But I also think that in some ways it was a blessing that she was not around as I discovered all this. And it was a double blessing my grandmother was not around when I discovered all this, because I don't know what would have happened with them. They might have talked me out of it because they did have that kind of control over me. And so with them not being here, like I did have the freedom to move forward. I mean, psychologically it was difficult, but because I knew they would be very upset about this. But I guess the journalist in me just won. The journalist in me won.
Right. Ralph asked, do you know the story of Sugara, the Japanese consul general?
Yes. Yeah,
Uh,
he was a Japanese consul to Lithuania during World War II, and as many Jews tried to escape, they couldn't get visas. So he started handing out visas to Jews to go to Japan. And then I guess in Japan, they started forbidding him to do that. And he still gave the Jews visas. So that my Holocaust guide, Simon Dovidovicius, was the director of the Sugihara Museum in Kaunas. So Sugihara now has a museum named after him. I think the Sugihara family finances it. So he worked for them. So he told me all about them.
And that proves that even if you work for a government, you can still do what's right.
Yeah, and I think I found out and wrote about how, you know, Lithuanians would not have been killed if they did, like, you know, there's this myth that if you don't kill Jews, you're going to be killed yourself, and that's not true. Basically, they would have found someone else, and maybe you would have been ridiculed or something, but you would have lost your job or something, but you would have not have been killed.
Right. Okay. I think the only happy ending for this story is that you were brave enough to publish it, and it doesn't erase the tragedy, but at least it brings light to the truth, and it's really commendable. Just incredible strength that you were able to push through, because there were so many obstacles, time pressures and financial. You spent so much money doing the research, and just language barriers, and yeah, it's a fascinating story, and I recommend it.
And write a good review on Goodreads. Counteract the trolls.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Levy Senior Center Foundation. Silvia, this was wonderful, and I am so happy that you were receptive to speaking to us.
Thank you for inviting me. My pleasure.
Absolutely. Folks, stay tuned. You will be receiving a survey about today's webinar. You'll be receiving that shortly, and the tape will be posted to YouTube later this evening. See you next Tuesday. Thank you so much.
Take care,
Bye.
Wendy. Bye.
Bye.